Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello, and this is Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister, Alex Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
Thank you for finding us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Press subscribe, press follow wherever you are, and you'll get all of our episodes dropping into your feed. On the podcast today, what impact the Chancellor's budget could have on Scotland. We'll give you our thoughts on the lack of overnight counting of votes at next year's election. We've had a few questions on that, so you will hear the answers. And MSP Liam McArthur, Liberal Democrat MSP, joins us to discuss the almost 300 amendment to Scotland's assisted dying bill, which are being debated in Parliament. It is, of course, his bill, so we'll get his take as that stage of the legislation gets underway. Thank you for being with us. You can find us on YouTube, you can follow us on X, watch us on TikTok, and subscribe to our mailing list at holyroodsources.com. Just before we dive on in, thank you to those of you who are coming to our pub quiz in less than a month. The inaugural Holyrood Sources Christmas pub quiz, which has basically sold out. I mean, there's like 3 tickets left if you fancy it. Geoff, if you got a team ready?
I have a team.
Andy, you got a team?
The most politically disconnected clowns you'll ever meet, but nonetheless, I have a team, my friends.
Go on, Andy.
I mean, well, listeners will think that this is, just a little part of our show here, but I'm genuinely asking this question. I didn't realise I needed to put a team together. I didn't know what we were actually doing as part of this. So that's fine. Have I got a table? Do I need to put a team together?
Well, you don't have a table. Sometimes I do wish that people would read my emails and my text messages, but hey, you can lead a horse to water and all that.
Right.
I mean,
I think we should, as the saying goes, let's take this one offline.
Okay. Yeah, Andy's cock up. We'll talk about it after the podcast. Perfect. Anyway, we'll see you on the 2nd of December in Edinburgh for the inaugural pub quiz. We're looking forward to that. Right, let's get into it then. The manifesto pledge could not have been more explicit, could it? We will ensure taxes on working people are kept as low as possible. Labour will not increase taxes on working people, which is why we will not increase national insurance, the basic, higher, or additional rates of income tax, or VAT. That is the quote from the Labour Party manifesto ahead of the general election last year. Rachel Reeves, of course, had a speech in Downing Street this week. She got journalists there at 8 o'clock in the morning to basically hear her outline the case as to why she is going to need to break that manifesto commitment in some way. There's lots of, I suppose, unknowns about what she will actually choose to do. Andy, the bottom line is she's going to raise taxes. She's going to break the promise in the manifesto. As a political question to start us off, are the tax rises worse than breaking the promise?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Really?
Look, there's a few things in here. Firstly, we need to forget about this manifesto promise because it's already been broken. It was broken with the employer NI rise last time. Trying to pretend that when you raise national insurance on the employer of the people, trying to pretend that doesn't have an impact on the people, on the workers, is obviously ridiculous. People lost their jobs because of that tax rise. So, what's worse than a tax rise on a person? Probably them losing their job. So let's not pretend that taxes haven't already been raised on workers. The sort of pre-caveat I would give here is that if you are determined to raise more money through taxation, then you are better just doing it through income tax, because it's probably the least distortionary tax to do it through. If you want to raise a big chunk of money and you don't want unintended consequences, you're probably better doing it through income tax. When you start mucking about with all the small taxes, you end up actually raising less money when you increase them because of the unintended consequences. So I suppose that's the sort of the tick, I guess, would be to look at income tax. However, the thing that gets me about this debate is that there is an assumption and a claim by the government that they are taking the tough decisions here, that this is part of them doing the right thing by the country and taking the tough decisions. I think that's total rubbish. Raising tax is not a tough decision. It's actually the easy way out of a much deeper and much more systemic problem. So the IMF thinks that of 36 advanced economies, Britain has the 6th highest national debt, the 5th highest deficit, and the 3rd highest borrowing costs. We spend almost as much servicing debt as we do on education, the entirety of the education budget. So to pretend that a tax rise, an income tax rise, somehow puts Britain in a better position is ridiculous. Britain's position is dismal, and it's dismal because of the amount of money we are spending, not because of the amount of tax that we are taking. The simple reality is until you deal with the welfare bill, which they now can't do because their MPs won't let them, until you deal with the welfare bill and specifically the amount of money being spent on working age people, nothing else matters, and tax rises will simply make the problem worse and worse and worse.
Okay. Right, lots to get
Sorry,
at.
can I
Go
come
on,
in?
Geoff. Yeah, do.
Firstly, Andy's completely wrong in answer to your question. In a political framing, of course, breaking the promise is worse than tax rises because, this is going to feature every time Rachel Reeves stands up at that dispatch box, goes in a public event, whatever. You said they weren't going up. You lied. We can't trust you. Now, that is politically toxic for any
Yeah, but that's politics versus economics. It's politically worse, fine, but it's not economically worse. Break as many manifesto pledges as you want. Just don't break the economy at the same time.
The last time I checked, this is a political podcast and we were analysing politics, right?
Well, we should branch out.
but for Rachel Reeves' credibility, this is going to be torturous period, for the next 6 months or so, should she raise taxes. And I fully agree with your analysis beyond that, Andy, about the economics of this. A couple of things, if I may, please, listeners, find Ed Conway's 13-minute primer on the situation facing the Chancellor and the UK government just now. It's actually really, really instructive, really insightful. One interesting thing I thought from it, though, was in terms of the overall tax burden the UK faces, it's actually about in the mid-range of advanced economies, countries just now. It's not the highest, and it's certainly not the lowest. It's about mid-range, which I do find interesting context, which is why I go back to the point fundamentally and say what's going to kill her here is the fact she made this pledge so stoically, so strongly that taxes would not go up, and not a year later they are going to go up. Final point, if I may, we touched on this last week, but she's not communicating from a position of strength, and I have found the Treasury's briefings on all the different things that they may do in this budget quite extraordinary, from income tax to threshold freeze extension, from exit tax to levies on LLPs to mansion tax, stamp duty, land tax, inheritance tax changes, capital gains tax alignment, landlord national insurance, pension tax relief, and many, many more. They've briefed everything. They've thrown everything into the ether. Now, again, if you're doing that from a position of strength, you can see a strategy. Let's find which ones have the path of least resistance and choose from there. But from her speech yesterday, which I thought was quite extraordinary, actually, this was not a speech where you are laying the groundwork so that you can exceed expectations. You say, oh, it's all going to be really bad. But look, we actually did better. It's all going to be really bad, and by the way, in 3 weeks' time, it's going to get a lot worse. That was the speech. Really, it was just to let you know, guys, this is bad, and the markets reacted accordingly, as we saw with the value of the pound sterling. Look, fundamentally, Calum, breaking the promise politically, toxic in this particular environment. Going to be really challenging for her.
And let's focus in on what this means for Scotland, or what it could mean for Scotland, depending on what comes down the line. And we'll talk about everybody's favourite thing, the fiscal framework, over the course of the next few minutes. But I mean, the reality of this is really quite interesting. So, income tax on earnings is mostly devolved to Scotland. Holyrood sets the rates and bands for Scottish taxpayers. All revenue raised in Scotland goes directly into the Scottish budget. By the way, worth noting, the fiscal framework was negotiated by John Swinney. When Scotland keeps its own income tax revenue, the Treasury then deducts money from the block grant in order to balance the books. So, as is put nice and simply for us in the Herald today, for every penny of income tax Scotland raises for itself, Westminster reduces the block grant by an equivalent amount. So, if Scottish income tax revenues grow faster than the rest of the UK's, Scotland keeps the extra and comes out ahead. Thanks to the Herald for that analysis. So, Andy, we come to what the Chancellor's decisions could mean for Scotland. So one of the suggestions here is that she will tweak both income tax and national insurance. In theory, then, Scottish employees would pay what? Break it down for us. How does this work? What would be the reality?
Well, because, as you say, income tax is devolved, but national insurance is reserved, Rachel Reeves is effectively putting up income tax. Let's say she puts up income tax by 2 pence, but cuts national insurance by 2 pence. And it's worth just saying that is a proposal from the Resolution Foundation, a think tank which was started by Torsten Bell, who is now a minister in Rachel Reeves' Treasury. So that's
He's basically
why it's been
writing
giving a lot.
the budget is the briefing.
Right. So it's
this
been
is
given a lot
Torsten
of
Bell
credence
budget.
because, you know, it's his think tanks that suggested this, and so not unreasonably people think this has maybe got a decent chance of happening. Now, the Reeves argument is actually we then get to say we're not increasing tax on working people because working people will effectively see neutrality, right? They'll pay 2 pence more income tax, but 2 pence less NI, and therefore it's the same. And the reason they'd be doing it is more people, the income tax is broader. So, for example, pensioners pay income tax, but they don't pay national insurance, so it'll raise an element of money. The interesting Scottish context, which, you know, is always a bit of an afterthought in the Treasury, to be honest, is that what that effectively does is, if all else remains equal, it gives Scottish people a 2 pence tax cut because their income tax doesn't change because it's devolved, but their national insurance goes down by 2 pence because it's reserved. So, as you mentioned, Fraser of Allender have said that will leave a deficit of about £1 billion. It's about 500 million-ish per pence that comes off the block grant. So the Scottish Government either act or don't act. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure that what they'll say is, OK, that's fine. We're putting income tax up by 2 pence, but it's Westminster's fault. And then everything will just stay the same. But we do know, guys, that there are people inside the Scottish Government who think that the last round of Scottish Government tax increases that increased the gap between Scotland and England was unwise. Doesn't raise any money, really, at that top end because of behavioural change, and it sends a pretty bad signal about what sort of place Scotland is to do business. So, you know, politically, I can see an argument, frankly, for John Swinney saying, maybe we could shoulder some of these cuts. Maybe we could make some savings in public expenditure. I mean, let's face it, it's not going to be that hard to cut out some waste from Scottish Government spending. Maybe we should do that. And 6 months out from an election, let's sell the fact that we're giving everybody in the country a 2 pence tax cut by not changing income tax. Wow. Geoff, you would do this if you were still in charge, surely, wouldn't you?
Sold to the highest bidder. No, look. I mean, Andy, it's good politics what you've outlined. But if I may, just kind of a couple of observations what you've just said. This is all a really fascinating discussion. Firstly, you used that phrase "working people," and I think the UK government need to get away from this phrase of everyone under 46,000 is a working person, but everyone above it, you know, it leaves it open to question whether you are a bus driver, potentially, a teacher,
an MP, an MSP.
MP, I think that's brilliant. I was going to come to that.
Not working people.
Which I'm not sure many people would disagree with.
Yeah, fair.
But no. Like this sort of stuff, you know, in purely political communication terms, is just ridiculous. Get away from that as quick as possible. So I was just a quick sidebar. On what you say, Andy, I'm not going to repeat anything that you said. Really good analysis, but I think what this tells me, guys, if we didn't already know it, but this so close to an election in Scotland, and given the Scottish budget is not till January, goodness sake, I think, you know, this is going to be the mother of all blame games. SNP blaming the Labour government at Westminster for their ills, and a Sarwar doing the same in reverse towards the SNP. And I think if you're reform right now, let's accept that the Tories are kind of guilt by association with their previous tenure in office as their role in the demise of the UK finances, then I think reform must be going, oof, what an opportunity in Holyrood and indeed in Wales and English local elections for us to have some fun, because they don't have incumbency to defend. and I think they'll fancy their chances. That's where I think the politics of this will go.
Do you know one interesting thing? It's a little bit of an aside, but it is related to this, that I picked up from... So Nigel Farage made this speech on Monday to the City in London. So actually quite interesting, some quite interesting stuff in it. There was one thing that I picked up on, which I think is totemic about the sort of thing we've talked about, where he basically said, look, the pension's triple lock. Don't know, guys, we might have to get rid of that. Now, if you speak to any Labour or Tory MP in private, they will all tell you the pension's triple lock is completely unaffordable and obviously can't continue, but none of them say it because they're so scared of what the public reaction will be. But Farage talks quite a lot about spending cuts and previously talked quite a lot about tax cuts as well. Look at the poll ratings. It doesn't have an impact. People are looking at what he's saying and saying, well, maybe he's got a point about things like the pensions triple lock. Why doesn't the government take some of these things on and give people a bit of respect for the fact that they can handle these discussions?
But with respect, Andy, you're kind of contradicting yourself there, because surely that instance that you've just outlined suggests why breaking the political promise is worse than actually the tax rises themselves or the spending cuts. That's the point I'm making.
Well, but do you not think so? Are you arguing for a situation where there is more honesty about the spending situation in particular the country's actually in, though? Because I feel that's what he's... I was just answering the question that our very capable host put to us.
There is
My
a question
point is,
about...
there's a default assumption, right, that if you tell the truth, you're going to get punished for it. And I'm questioning that assumption. I'm not sure that these days that's actually true. I think maybe give people a bit more credit for the fact that they get when something's unaffordable and when you need to change.
The other part of the promise question, and this is what I wanted to come back to, is that back in June, Anas Sarwar was asked, could he specifically rule out any increase in any Scottish income tax band or rate, which are devolved to Holyrood, as we say, under a Labour government at Holyrood? And Anas Sarwar said, yes, next question. So actually, in the politics of all of this, there's another promise there from Sarwar, which, to follow Andy's point on what Swinney could do, which is to say, look, we're not going to raise taxes here. And actually, that could box Sarwar in, should he go on to win the election in May. And I realise there's a lot of ifs and buts in all of that. But the fact is, he's made a promise on income tax as well, which he might be absolutely gubbed by in a few months' time.
I think that is a fair point, but I also think that the volume of water required to flow under the bridge before that becomes an eventuality means that it's probably not something that will be top of Anas's risk register at the moment.
Fair. The other thing I should just mention, of course, is on national insurance, if that was to be tweaked, that Scottish pensioners and landlords and self-employed people who don't pay employee national insurance contributions would not get any benefit in a national insurance cut. And I know there will be some in all of those categories listening, so I think it's worth mentioning. Right, just when we're considering the economy and Scotland, should we just do one on whisky tariffs? Because John Swinney's had discussions on cutting tariffs on Scotch whisky, and what was described as a lengthy meeting with the US ambassador to the UK. He met Warren Stevens at Butte House on Saturday. UK government negotiators fly to Washington in the next week in the hope of securing better terms on Scotch whisky. But the political bit of this, Geoff, is criticism from the Scottish Secretary Douglas Alexander, who suggested that the First Minister, should keep his focus on domestic matters, and said he actually compared Swinney's meeting in the White House with President Trump to, quote, a day trip to Washington. He was fairly dismissive. Has he got a point?
No, he doesn't. And I'll come to that in a second. I want to just point out, though, and pay tribute to Anas Sarwar for a second, because whilst the story was kind of frothing, Anas Sarwar put out a Halloween scary story of Analog John video on social media, which, can I just say, was very effective. It was quite funny. It was well done. Very risky, these things. You can overdo it and quite easily. But I actually thought it was quite effective in terms of highlighting his core messaging about, particularly personal and John, saying, he's past it. SNP's been perfect so long. Look at what's happened to health, education, all the rest of it. But it was really effective. But then this story quickly came about Douglas Alexander attacking John. I think there was a mention of, just getting photo calls and handshakes and all the rest of it. And I just thought, no, you guys are falling into the trap, because Fundamentally, people do not care who's standing up representing them, whether it's SNP or Lib. They just want people to do it. And that's what John has done. Firstly, by doing this, making the attack, it gives John the right reply to remind everyone, well, I was just responding to an opportunity that was presented to me by industry who said that whisky was not high on the agenda at all in the UK government negotiations back in April. And so I made it a virtue of my discussions with President Trump when he visited Aberdeen. And then he invited me back to the White House and I made the case again. Again, he's presented himself as a statesman standing up for Scotland. There it is, klaxon for this podcast. And then secondly, it actually undermines, in my opinion, Scottish Labour, because imagine for a second that Anna Sarwar was First Minister and he was making the case to President Trump, almost suggests that, no, Anna's back in your box, son, we'll deal with that. We're the big UK government. That is exactly the sort of stuff that people don't like, and it's actually what led to the demise of Labour back in 2007. I know, because I was there, and I'm sure Jack McConnell in his quiet moments would confirm that.
Nicely done. Andy, do you want to say anything about Scotch whisky?
Just that. I mean, look, I think Dougie Alexander's really high quality. I really like him. I think he's a good.
So do I, incidentally.
Politician. But if what he's saying is correct, why didn't Douglas Alexander go over to the Oval Office? Why didn't he get the photo shoot that he's complaining about? Why wasn't he the one who was there with Lord Mandelson at the time? Probably doesn't want to be there with him now. Why wasn't he the one who was there with Mandelson and Trump around the Resolute desk?
I would have thought.
Around the Resolute desk, doing a deal on Scotch whisky and telling the world that Douglas Alexander has gone over with the Scotland office and he's done the deal on Scotch whisky. Like, if you want the perception that you're the one who's making the moves here, then you should be the one who makes the moves. Don't blame John Swinney for pulling off a pretty incredible diplomatic coup and looking like the guy who's over there standing up for Scotland's whisky industry.
Fair
do it
enough.
yourself.
Right, let's turn to listener question of the week, a brand new feature that I'm loosely introducing. To be fair, there wasn't an email or a text about this one,
No,
so you guys
another
are
new one on
absolved
us.
of
Yeah, very good.
responsibility. This one is from Jane, who says, "Hello, I'd be interested in your thoughts on the plans to wait until the next day for the 2026 election count. It absolutely dismayed me and definitely feels like it sends a message that this isn't all that important. I can't imagine them doing it for Westminster." But she says, "Is this just anorak angst?" asks Jane. So yes, there will be no overnight count for the Scottish Parliament election next May. The election is on Thursday the 7th, but ballot boxes won't be opened until the morning of Friday the 8th, which is when counting will begin. The expectation is that all the results will then be declared on the Friday. At the last election, which was 2021, counting was also moved to the daytime and indeed staggered, but that was partly so that, well, mostly really, so that COVID safety measures could be followed, and we didn't know the final result until the Saturday. There's no doubt it's less exciting waiting till Friday. Isn't it? Everybody going to bed on Thursday night and then waking up to get going again? It's a bit of rubbish, isn't it, Geoff?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a traditionalist like this. I love the overnight stuff. I love folk being knackered, candidates being knackered. Always good for a bit of a controversial quote when you're tired and you've either lost or you've won big, whatever. I like the excitement. I like the tension. I just kind of feel it takes away from it a bit. There's not often that politics is genuinely exciting. It actually captures a lot of people's attention. Now, I just don't see it during the day being as much of an interest story. You want to wake up in the morning and find out what's happened. And I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't
I
like
wish
it
it
either.
could be avoided, to be honest.
Andy?
I'm furious. And I would love to think that the nation would share my fury at there not being an overnight election count. However, the unfortunate reality is that the nation won't care at all about that and will get on with their Friday as the results come in. It'll just be us who are upset about having to have slept all night and be doing all this on the Friday.
There is going to be
People don't care. People who are not like us don't care.
I think that's not true. I think there will be something resembling a productivity crisis on Friday because everybody will be in their office with Sky News or the BBC or Times Radio on and not paying the blindest
I'm
bit of
afraid
attention to work.
in 2020's Britain, there's been a productivity crisis on a Friday for quite some time. So I think it will make very little difference to that. We're effectively operating a 4-day week without it being official. So
Well, there we are. Jane, in summary, we all dislike the decision, but also the decision is the decision. And frankly, it means that we all get a night's sleep, doesn't it? So our coverage on the Friday will be extremely good. But thank you for your question. If you would like to be in with the chance of having listener question of the week on next week's podcast, then WhatsApp it to us on 0333 404 6507 or email us hello@holyroodsources.com. Still to come on this episode, you'll hear from Liam McArthur, Liberal Democrat MSP, as the assisted dying bill makes its way to committee. There are almost 300 amendments to consider. Liam will tell us more about how they will get through them all and what some of the most difficult ones to consider actually are. Stay with us, that comes next. Thank you so much for listening to the Holyrood Sources podcast. Now, MSPs are scrutinising almost 300 proposed amendments to the assisted dying bill. This week has been the beginning of stage 2 deliberations of Liam McArthur MSP's Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland bill at Holyrood's Health Committee. Among the key proposals that MSPs are considering, raising the minimum age from 16 to 18 and clarifying the definition of terminal illness as well. As you'll be aware, this has been one of the most high-profile bills to ever be brought before Holyrood. Liam McArthur is with us now. Hi, Liam. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on. One of the questions I think on this is one of process. This is 287 amendments, I think. How on earth can the Parliament begin to work through this amount of concern and question and potential change to the bill?
Well, I think the first thing to say, I mean, to your point about this being such a high-profile bill, I think it was almost inevitable that there were going to be significant numbers of amendments at stage 2. I don't see that being any different at stage 3. I would make the observation in terms of the amendments that have been brought forward thus far at stage 2. There's quite a bit of overlap in terms of what they're trying to do, different ways of maybe achieving the same thing or taking a slightly different approach to the same issue. A lot of the amendments, again, this is familiar to other bills, are consequential on the substantive amendment. So while it's undoubtedly a large number of amendments, I think there are good and predictable reasons for why that's the case. And I think it's important that the Health Committee at stage 1 laid out a number of issues that it felt merited sort of further debate and discussion. And I think the amendments that we've seen lodged at stage 2 should allow that to happen. It's what happened in the committee on Tuesday morning, that first day of stage 2, and I think we'll see that continue over the next few weeks as those amendments fall to be dealt with.
Yeah. Andy, just by way of the process, I think it's interesting, isn't it? It is high profile. There are lots of amendments. Liam's saying there, that will probably continue into stage 3 as well. Is the Scottish Parliament doing this well so far on the process question?
Yes, it is. Before I answer that fully, as you know, guys, Message Matters works for one of the participants in this debate, Dignity in Dying, so I'm going to largely recuse myself from this conversation just in the interest of probity. I don't want any perceived conflict of interests. But what I would say before I do that is that, look, we've discussed on this podcast a lot. The Scottish Parliament does not always perform brilliantly as an institution. Not all the debates we have in the Parliament or in politics are particularly good. Not all the laws we pass are very good laws. But I would say that this particular debate, this piece of legislation, the way the Parliament has gone about it, the way that individual people have gone about it, has been, not just in Holyrood, also in Westminster, incidentally, has been the best of Parliament. We have done very, very well with this debate, and it's a big, big debate. It's a big public debate. It's a big political debate, and I think we've dealt with it really well. So I think, as I say, I'm not going to say too much more about my own views, just from a conflict of interest. But it's a pat on the back from me to really everybody involved on both sides of this debate. I think it's been good.
Yeah. Could I jump in on that, Calum? Because I think Andy makes a very important point. I mean, this is a serious issue on which people have very firm views. It can be quite emotive, but I think we saw it in the stage 1 debate back in May that those on both sides of the argument, those who feel somewhat conflicted, uncertain as to how to debate, how to vote on it. I think I've treated it with the seriousness that it deserves, and I've engaged in debate respectfully and in a measured tone. And I think that was again borne out in the exchanges at the Health Committee on Tuesday morning. I think while there's a lot of amendments that have been lodged, I don't consider any of them really to be what one might consider wrecking amendments. I think they are genuinely looking to explore issues where there are differences of opinion, and the committee will have to decide how it wishes to proceed. But I think that reflects what Andy's talking about, that there's not necessarily ever going to be alignment between different colleagues across the parties on this issue. But the way in which this debate is conducted is important, and at a time where I think public trust and confidence in our politics is not necessarily in a good place. I think this can only serve us well on an issue where I think the public is overwhelmingly in support of some form of change of the law to allow more choice at the end of life.
There is a question around some of the more, I guess, again, high-profile amendments as well to be asked. So, for example, I think one that is particularly ear-catching for our listeners is that as things stand, the age requirement is 16 in the Scottish legislation, and there is a question, an amendment, as to whether this should be raised to 18. Do you have a view on that, Liam, as the person who has brought this bill?
Yeah, I think, as I said in evidence to the committee at stage one and in the stage one debate back in May, that while 16, I think, is a defensible position in terms of the age of adulthood under Scots law, I think you look at jurisdictions around the world and pretty consistently 18 is the age threshold that is used. And so I think I was giving a clear steer that based on the evidence the committee was taking in my further reflections on it, I would be supportive of amendments that sought to raise the minimum age from 16 to 18. So Sanders Colhany has lodged, I think, 3 amendments that will help do that in the relevant parts of the bill. There was a proposal to raise it to 25. We had an opportunity to discuss that, the reasons for such a proposal at the committee on Tuesday. I don't believe that would be appropriate. I think for young adults, there may very well be additional training that would be required for professionals involved in that process. I think there may be other professionals that you would need to involve in that process because of the nature of the care being provided. But I think raising the age limit to 25 wouldn't be proportionate, and the 18 is the age that we should be going for in this legislation.
The other questions I wanted to put to you, and they actually all fall under the same umbrella, but let me do this. And I think sometimes on this podcast we're reluctant to compare Scotland to the rest of the UK because it's only helpful in certain circumstances, but I do actually think this is one of them where we have to consider how this would actually operate, because as things stand, the Scottish bill doesn't contain a prognostic timescale, i.e. the UK bill includes a 6-month prognosis to the end of life. Is that something that Scotland needs to consider? Let me add that the UK bill applies to conditions that are untreatable, but the Scottish bill refers to conditions that are unrecoverable. The UK bill also explicitly excludes mental illness, disability, or both as being the sole qualifying criteria for assisted dying. I do wonder if this amendment stage has to be about synchronising the Scottish legislation with what would happen in England and Wales. It could otherwise lead to quite a confusing outcome, could it not?
I don't think that needs to be the purpose of this stage. I think it needs to be a consideration that members of the Health Committee need to factor in to deciding how they respond to the various amendments. I think taking the examples that you cited there, Calum, amendments actually were passed on Tuesday morning that will give effect to that avoidance of doubt provision in relation to disability and mental disorder. So it brings it more in line with where the Westminster Bill is at the present time, albeit that is also a bill that's undergoing kind of scrutiny and amendment. Yeah. So it's a bit of a moving target. I think we've seen the amendment in relation to the age threshold raised from 16 to 18, bringing it into alignment, not just with Westminster, but as I say, with similar legislation in other jurisdictions. I think the debate around the prognosis period we had quite a good go at that on Tuesday morning. There were a number of amendments seeking to do slightly different things around different prognosis periods. I made the argument, as I've made for the last couple of years or so, that I'm not convinced that adds any safeguard. We see in other jurisdictions how and when patients seek to access an assisted death when they've got an advanced progressive terminal illness, and that some of the difficulties in being confident about the time left to live, I think, are concerns that health professionals have raised in the context of previous legislation considered by Holyrood. So we'll see. The Health Committee were not persuaded by some of the amendments we heard on Tuesday. I think we'll come back to this debate, and as I acknowledged yesterday, other jurisdictions operate with prognostic periods. They've gone through 5-year or 10-year reviews of that legislation and have not sought to remove the prognosis period. So even if it's not adding an additional safeguard, I think it could potentially be argued that it's not providing an unreasonable barrier to people accessing the choice to which they are entitled if they meet the eligibility criteria. So as I say, I think that's a debate that will continue. But the way in which health and care is delivered north and south of the border does vary. I think there are benefits in consistency, but I think what we need to do, as every other jurisdiction has done in passing legislation of this type, is learn the lessons from what we see elsewhere, but make sure what we have is legislation that fits the needs and circumstances here in Scotland. That's what the public would expect us to do. It's what practitioners that we're asking to be involved in this process would expect us to do, and it's what patients, I think, would expect of us as well.
I suppose, though, just to follow up on it, there is that sort of very stark, crude concern, is there not, that if it's easier on one side of the border to end your life than it is on the other, then actually it's going to create some sort of ghoulish tourism whereby people will drive a couple of hours because they're going to get the sign-off in an easier manner. Are there safeguards to prevent that sort of
I mean, there's residency requirements in the legislation. 12 months, ordinarily resident in Scotland, registered with a GP practice. I think some of those residency requirements were put in at a point where there wasn't a bill at Westminster, so the issue felt like a more live one, if you will. Yeah. I think we're talking about people with a terminal illness, often in the last weeks or months of their life. The notion that even if it were possible and there wasn't a residency requirement of them jumping in car, taking themselves away from whatever support network they had, the medical pathway they were in order to access the choice of an assisted death in Scotland, it is a difficult one to sustain. I think we need to be. I think we need to be cognizant of the risks of those cross-border issues, and I know it's something that colleagues at Westminster are giving thought to. The issues I'm giving thought to. The fact that there is a bill now in Westminster means those issues are a little different from where they were at the point where I introduced my bill. But I think this issue of assisted dying tourism is not really a serious concern at this stage.
Yeah, Liam, I thought it was interesting the comments that Andy made earlier on about the manner in which the Scottish Parliament has dealt with this. And I would say at the outset, I think that's in no small part to the manner in which you've introduced the bill and that you've marshalled your arguments in terms of constructive tone. And I mean that sincerely, and I applaud you for that because it's such an important debate. I suppose, I feel quite personal and emotional about this one because, and I mentioned this to you when we met last year, is that my father died when I was 17 and chronic heart failure. And one of the things that the paramedics reassured us with, you're looking for any solace in these moments, aren't you? But had said, look, had he survived, it got so deep that he would have been likely terminally ill at that point and incapacitated. And my father was a proud man, and he worked hard, he played hard, and I always thought, well, God, I wouldn't have wanted that from him. And I always think about that when I think about this debate. And in that regard, I think I'm instinctively very favourable to this. But then he did die. And would have I thought differently had he survived? And you just never know that, do you? And I suppose, what would you say to people in that circumstance, for example, to kind of reassure them on what you're doing? I know Calum's asked some really good questions about process and procedure, but I think this isn't a motive debate. It's a personal thing rather than a political thing. And I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Look, Geoff, I think what this process over the last 4 years has taught me, very different from the debate we had 10 years ago on the second bill that Margot brought forward that Patrick Harvey then took through Parliament. The number of personal stories that we're seeing told here. I mean, this is personal to people. People have their perspective and a view on this that's through the prism of personal experience, whether it's a close family member, whether it's a friend who's died in difficult circumstances, or equally that those who have seen family members die with excellent palliative care, well supported through to death. Everybody has a personal story to this issue. I think it's why it resonates in the way that it does. I know that I saw the Co-op Funeral Care came out with some research a couple of months ago suggesting actually since the introduction of the bill at Westminster and the debate around my bill and similar bills in Isle of Man and Jersey, around 20 million people within the UK have had discussions around death and dying. And we don't discuss that nearly often enough. There was a debate on amendments on Tuesday around whether you would link an eligibility to an anticipatory or a future care plan or a palliative care plan. Now, I think there are difficulties in attaching that to the eligibility criteria. But I think there's very good reason why more people ought to be considering having anticipated future care planning, discussing with their family members what their wishes might be. That those wishes may change over time, but having those discussions, I think these people in a far better place at the end of life when they're wrestling with so many other issues. I think the other thing to say is that I genuinely don't know whether or not this is a choice that I would use. I think we see in other jurisdictions that around a third of those that apply for an assisted death don't end up using it. Now, there can be many reasons for that, but I think in a good number of cases, it's probably individuals who've had this as a bit of an insurance policy that if things get too bad, they know that they have this option available, and it allows them, it frees them up in a sense to live the remainder of their life, whether that's measured in weeks or months or in years, to the fullest extent, and they're not weighted down by this anxiety, this kind of traumatizing anxiety about what their prognosis may mean for them, but also for those around them. Because I think we, as you have I think eloquently put, this can be a traumatizing experience, not just for the individual, but for those around them. And actually, these bad deaths, they don't end when the person dies. We've heard so many stories about people whose lasting and abiding memory of their father, their grandfather, their mother, whoever it may be, has been so traumatic that it's almost difficult to see the life that they led before that death. And we've got to be able to do better than this.
Liam, thanks very much for your time. I think it's important on the pod that we check in on the progress of these things. Geoff, thank you also for your contribution. It is emotional, and we're glad to hear it. And well, Andy, thanks for being upfront and honest, because it is a difficult one, and we don't want to cause any extra concern and consternation either. But Liam, thank you. We will keep in touch as the bill proceeds. But for now, thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.